بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى وصحبه وذريته أجمعين. Okay, so we were here somewhere. So we're starting from here today, but let's go back a bit. So Bertrand Russell proved the reality of the movement on the basis of Cantor's theory of continuity. The reality of movement means reality of movement means the independent reality of space and the objectivity of nature. So movement can be real only if space has independent reality, not just reality but independent, and it seems like independent of objects. But the identity of continuity and the infinite divisibility of space and no solution of the difficulty. Now he is critiquing Russell's solution, or the solution he is attributing to Russell. I think this I mentioned several times before, but it's worth repeating that here. Allama Iqbal's claim that movement or motion can be real only if space is real and independent. Nature itself is objective. Now I have several times mentioned the ambiguity here because real can be contrasted with ideal. Real can be contrasted with illusion. And ideality and illusions are not the same thing. That's one thing. And space can be real again, whether it can be ideal or illusion. And similarly, independent can be independent in itself and independent of the object. So space can be independent in itself but might not be independent of the object. Which surrounds it. Because if space is an emptiness between the objects, if objects are not there, probably not correct to say that it is emptiness or emptiness between the objects or among objects. Also, objectivity of nature. What does it mean? Is ideal, if nature is ideal, is that because objectivity can be contrasted with subjectivity as well as ideality. So these are all the questions, and it's not clear whether all these things are essential for the objective or real nature of motion. Okay, now here he starts his critique, but the identity of continuity and infinite divisibility, space is no solution of the difficulty of overcoming, I guess, Zeno's paradoxes. And what he means here is that Cantor's theorem or hypothesis, or the continuity of space and time, I mean infinite. So Cantor's proves sort of continuity of space and time through equating. That's what identity mean here in Iqbal's sentence. What, according to Iqbal, Cantor does is equates continuity with infinite divisibility. So what he posits is that something is infinitely divisible, then it is continuous. There is no gap. Okay, so but the identity of continuous infinite divisible is with no solution. Why it's no solution? He gives the argument in the next portion. Why is not it's no solution? It's no solution because, according to Allama Iqbal, assuming that there is one-to-one correspondence between the infinite multiplicity of instants in a finite interval of time and an infinite multiplicity of points in the finite portion of space, the difficulty arising from the divisibility remain the same. What was the difficulty arising from the divisibility? Space and time. That's why it's important to note, as we noted last time, because Zeno has several paradoxes. And a paper I quoted, a recent paper on Russell, the history of Russell's understanding of Zeno's paradoxes and his application of different solutions to it. What that paper claimed was that when he is referring to Zeno's actual paradoxes, he is not actually applying Cantor's thesis to them, and when he is applying Cantor's thesis to so-called paradoxes, he is not referring to Zeno's actual paradoxes. So, what is the divisibility for space and time, and why it's problem? Because if space is made up of points and time is made up of points and motion is going from this time to this space to this space in this time, for example. And if these points are discrete, there's always a gap, meaning there's, in a sense, no space. And if there's no space, there's no movement. That's the divisibility problem. And Cantor's thesis purportedly solved this problem because they're continuous, like they're divisible, there's no gap. Now, Allama Iqbal comes up with the argument, again, this continuity argument. And what he says is that might have solved one problem, but it created another problem. Or in other words, it might be able to answer to Zeno's paradoxes, which were based on the gap, but it can't can't answer Zeno's paradoxes, which are based on infinite divisibility. And Allama Iqbal sums up that objection, that assuming that there is one-to-one correspondence between infinite multiple instances in a finite interval of time and infinite multiplicity of points in a finite portion of space. So this is space. So these are finite points, T1 to T. This is S1 to S2. So these are finite space and time. But they are, between this, they're infinitely divisible. And here, infinitely divisible. And there's one-to-one correspondence between this divisibility. So, it doesn't solve the problem, because since the points between S1 and S2 and T1 and T2 are infinite or infinitely divisible, even if they are continuous, the gap problem is solved, but the problem of motion is still there, because in fact the body is at rest at every point. And if it is rest at every point, it means the sum total of rest must be rest as well. And something like that. That seems to be Allama Iqbal's objection. So he's saying that assuming that there is a one-to-one correspondence between I just went through this, so between the infinite multiplicity of instants and finite interval of time and infinite multiplicity of points in finite portion of space, the difficulty arising from the divisibility remains the same. Meaning that you can always divide the next instant of time as well as next point, next portion of the space. And since it's infinite, the object actually never moves. So yeah, so the mathematical conception of continuity as infinite series applies not to movement regarded as an act. Now, this is another argument, that movement is an action, but rather the picture of movement as viewed from the outside. Outside the object, the act of movement, that is, the movement as a lived and not as a thought, does not admit of any divisibility. So divisibility is sort of objectification of the actual movement, which is a lived act. The flight of the arrow observed as a passage in space is divisible, but its flight regarded as an act in itself. But here he is sort of assuming that nature, subjectivity of nature in a Hegelian way, I guess. Act apart from its present space is one and inescapable of partition into multiplicity. Act. He's also sort of implicitly referring to Bergson's distinction between objective space and time as duration, which is experienced by the subject. In partition lies its destruction, that is, destruction of the movement. So the actual movement is a unified act. What we analyze is our objectification of that act. Okay. There are various objections we can raise about this, but probably we'll do this next time, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Sallu wa sallim ala sayyidina wa mawlana Muhammad wa ala ali sayyidina Muhammad wa barik wa sallim.